the vision for the master plan for the next 5 years is Kenya being a regional ICT hub and a globally competitive digital economy. And we have three foundations and three pillars to achieve this vision. One of the foundations is we want to create an integrated information infrastructure. This is very critical for our country to create that information infrastructure that will drive electronic government or e-government, or the provision of e-government services. Together with that is to create that integrated ICT infrastructure across the whole country, and particularly to the underserved areas. And the third foundation is developing the ICT human capital and workforce as basically a precondition to having all these things happening. And we then have three pillars, and the first one is e-government services, providing e-government services to businesses, to citizens, to investors, and so on and so forth. The second pillar is ICT as a driver of industry. Basically here it's computerizing different aspects of economic sectors in their value chains to improve efficiency, productivity, and so on and so forth, and contributing greatly to the growth of our GDP. And the third one is developing ICT businesses as part of growing the ICT sector. So those are the main things, the three foundations and the three pillars of the master plan. And just summarized 9 key outcomes, and I'll just mention a few of them. 80% contribution to GDP by this sector. In the master plan, we have come up with the ICT indicators for this sector, on which we shall we shall collect data and monitor and create all kinds of statistics about the sector. About jobs, 180,000 direct jobs, some innovations and commercializations of innovations, 37 successfully commercialized ICT applications, several companies to be formed, and so on and so forth. You can read for yourself. The other one is a number of flagship projects. We have a total of 15 flagship projects, if I can put all of them on the screen. These are projects that should be done in the next 5 years. One of them or several of them have already been initiated, like the one which was presented yesterday by Mwende on persons. You can see it's the first one there. But several of them are already been initiated, like the National Payment Gateway, and so on and so forth. So these are projects that we should be implementing in the next couple of years. And Mr. Cabinet Secretary, I was going to propose that in 2015, the next connected, we start tracking these projects to establish how far are we in implementing these projects, so that the next connected Kenya becomes one of tracking the implementation of the master plan. The summary of the governance structure. Yesterday, we agreed and I presented that many countries that have had, where ICT has had an impact, have adopted a governance structure where the president is a champion of ICT. And we have decided to go along the same way and created an oversight committee chaired by His Excellency the President, whose main role is largely involved in initiating some of these cross-cutting projects and monitoring their implementation on a regular basis. And that's why you see only 2 ticks on that project cycle. And then we have interministerial project steering committees, which will vary according to the projects, and chaired largely by the Cabinet Secretary who is in charge of that project. and they will be involved in project execution, monitoring and evaluation, reporting to the oversight committee, and of course, completing the project. And ICTA will be involved in all the stages of the project, and the ministry or the department or the agency which is in charge of this project, which owns this project, will also be involved in all the stages of the project. Those are, to me, those are the key things in the master plan. If I was to present, those are the key things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Waema. I think that gives a very good recap of what we went through yesterday on the ICT Master Plan. It's now my pleasure to invite our Cabinet Secretary and the Minister from Rwanda to take us through a number of things. And I think the focus here is on building integrated ICT info and infrastructure, as well as to unpack some of the discussions they've been having around the Northern Corridor integration. So, Karibu. Yes.
Thank you, Victor, Professor Waema, my brother and colleague Nsengimana from Rwanda. I want to start, first of all, by apologizing to all of you that I came to this meeting later than I expected or later than I wanted to come because of the challenges of scheduling. As you have noticed in government, we have quite a number of stuff going on and a number of things we are doing. Our plans and schedules changed so many times. Initially, when we were planning this meeting with colleagues from the ICT Authority, we had actually arranged that His Excellency the President would be here in Mombasa, and we wanted him to spend time at Connected Kenya to be able to know what exactly we are doing and what the ICT as a sector is doing. Then that did not work out because of his schedules, and of course when we tried to get a hold of the Deputy President, it was difficult for him to leave Nairobi while the President is out of the country. And so many other things that happened. I felt guilty yesterday, and I was saying it's comforting enough to just think about the famous Negro spiritual, nobody knows the troubles I see, nobody knows but Jesus, because there are so many troubles around, and I think when we can gather as Kenyans to look at our constitution, we need to answer a few questions about the structure of government we gave ourselves, whether 18 ministers are actually enough to do backup support to the president and all the work that needs to be done without assistant ministers and so on, and you just basically spend your day running up and down. But anyway, that said, I first of all want to say thank you to the organizers of this meeting. I want to start by welcoming my brother and my good friend here, our colleague, the Honorable John Nasasira, the Minister for Communication from Uganda, was around for a day. He also has a punishing schedule back in Uganda, so he had to go back, but he left, the regulator and his other technical team are with us. The Permanent Secretary for ICT from South Sudan is in the room, and those of you who were at dinner last night, you met him. And we have been holding meetings on the auspices of the Northern Corridor Infrastructure Development, which essentially brings together Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. And we were lucky that when we had the summit in Kigali, we successfully convinced both the ministerial summit and the heads of state to include ICT as a critical infrastructure within the infrastructure discussions, because previously discussions were around roads, the SGR, and so on. And when ICTs were included as part of the critical infrastructure, we now go to the table to begin discussing and dealing with issues related to the ICTs. I'll come back to that a little later and give you a brief highlight on what we have been able to do. And my colleague will comment briefly on what has happened on that. Let me just take just a few minutes with your very kind indulgence to say this, that every time we have conversations such as we're having here at the Connected Kenya, the question that we have to answer for us in government is, what is our role and how do we support the sector? How do we enhance the management or the governance of the sector? and how do we facilitate the sector? Because I've made this point more than enough times that I do not think that there is a country or a government anywhere on earth that has got enough resources to invest in the ICT as a sector in its entirety. What happens is that governments usually play a critical role on policy, they support infrastructure development, and they facilitate investments and then growth of innovation in the sector. So how do we intend to play our role? We've already played our role by facilitating the development of the new reviewed National ICT Master Plan, which I'm going to request you that as you continue debating, we actually should now call it the Smart Kenya Development Plan. Why? Because as a country, we have now signed up the Smart Africa Initiative, and our president is the one who was tasked with the responsibility of leading the policy pillar in the Smart Africa program. And because of that, what we have developed as a national ICT master plan, in my view, we will call it the Smart Kenya Master Plan, because essentially the intention we have is to ensure that we live in a smart environment, and therefore we are enhancing the Smart Africa agenda, as it were. Now, facilitating the development of the ICT Master Plan, the finalization of the National Broadband Strategy, the development of the guidelines on spectrum, and then enhancing the work that is going on now on the development and finalization of a reviewed national cybersecurity master plan and policy are the criticals that we need to do as government. And then work on the legislative actions that follow to ensure that the policies and the actions we take are anchored in and protected by legislation. In certain cases, we've also implemented in the last 1 year, we've written all the 4 pieces of legislation we're expected to develop to meet the requirements of Article 34 and 35 of the Constitution. The Kenya Information Communication Amendment Act, which is in place, the Media Council of Kenya Act, which is now in place, access to information and data protection, which are done, will be in Parliament in early May. We've completed all these legislative actions because we intend to be facilitative to the sector. And in addition to that, we've worked on other policy discussions and interventions, like the development of bylaws with county governments to ensure the integration of ICTs in the development of county structures, so that, as we agreed with the county of Nairobi, for example, next time people present plans for approval to City Hall, they must demonstrate that they have taken care of trunking and all that. And then hopefully in the coming year, we are going to complete the enactment of the Critical Installations Bill, which essentially designates ICT infrastructure as critical infrastructure, which is supposed to be protected as a critical security and critical economic infrastructure as we go forward. That, in my view, is the role of government. But in addition to that, our responsibility is to interface with you, with the private sector, and ensure that there are seamless discussions or conversations with you to factor in our plans and in our actions your own thoughts to address your needs so that your investments can be enhanced in this sector as we move forward. And we've engendered several conversations. And I want to start, first of all, by making a specific ask. And as we go forward with these conversations, and I'm reminded I don't have much time, but as we go forward in these conversations, I want to suggest to you, dear colleagues, that we now need to move further and further into making our conversations a bit more structured. I'm happy about the proposals that Tim and his colleagues have made about the implementation of the ICT Master Plan. We are ready to actualize this, and we are ready to work with the Office of the President to ensure that the President, as he supports us, also lends the weight of his office to ensure that we work and act in a structured manner and implement this plan. But I want to ask you also, especially those from the private sector, that you need to develop a framework that audits what we do, monitors what we do. We would like to get structured feedback from you. I agree with Tim, and I would even try to refine his proposal, that we should use Connected Kenya as an evaluation opportunity. We should come here, and I should present to you a report every year on what we have been able to do on the implementation of this plan. Because if we agree that this is the roadmap to our digital future, then we must be accountable enough to present to you a report from now until the horizon, the lifespan of this plan comes to an end. We should be able to come before you every annual meeting and present to you a report on what we have done on this plan. But rather than wait for a whole year, I have proposed to colleagues in terms of the organization of this meeting that let us step up our engagement. Instead of waiting for a whole year to come back to Mombasa for Connected Kenya, I suggest that we can organize a smaller structure with a broad enough representation that holds a half-a-day quarterly meeting to review the decisions and the discussions that we have here, review our actions on what we have done, so that we as government also can walk on the narrow and straight when it comes to policy implementation. We believe that is the best way to go forward in terms of policy implementation. Secondly, I want to ask you, because we've been having discussions with colleagues from Eastern Africa as a whole, and we have committed support from Rwanda, the minister is here, Uganda, the minister was here, South Sudan, I would like to persuade you to agree with the ICT authority and us that from next year we don't have a connected Kenya, we have a connected East Africa. What that will mean, because I have had conversations with my colleagues already, and I think they don't mind us holding the first or the inaugural Connected East Africa Conference. What it will mean is that we will pull our partners and colleagues from the East Africa as a region so that we meet here. We can have our Kenya caucus to present you the report on the master plan, but at least we need now to step up the regional conversations that we are having so that we address the East African market as a regional market, 155 million people. Because some of the policy decisions we will take, some of the actions we need to take to support infrastructural development are critical to the growth of the sector. And if we acted in consonance, there is a likelihood that we will support the sector better. So if you don't have a problem, from 2015, by the grace of God, we'll be having Connected East Africa here. We will get delegates from Uganda, from Rwanda, from South Sudan, and the companies that are investing there, and the government, to bring caucuses here so that we begin looking at this sector within the framework of a regional market. I want to say two things before I invite my colleague. One, in the case of Kenya, devolution is a huge opportunity for us. It's a huge opportunity for us. We've been having conversations as government because policy on postal services, telecommunications, and generally the ICT sector are not devolved to county governments. Broadcasting is not devolved to county governments. Policy and implementation of policy and even the legislative actions is still a national government responsibility. But what we've been trying to do is to stem anarchy in the county governments so that, you know, in terms of deployment, in terms of, our policy frameworks that are developed, we do not, devolution does not become a challenge in the sense that we have county governments coming up with frameworks that are difficult to interface with national government activities and plans. So we've engendered a very strong conversation with county governments through the county executive committee members in charge of ICTs. And I want to thank my colleagues from the ICT authority for the excellent work they have done in coordinating the CECs from the counties. We want to use that framework to ensure that going into the future, we interface seamlessly with the county governments. And then the conversations we've had so far with some governors are very promising. Actions we've had on bylaws, on integration of ICT, and on e-government services, they have all been welcome. The challenge has been capacity, understanding of policy, and in some cases, of course, infrastructure. We are doing our part to enhance county connectivity because that's how we'll address infrastructure. But I've continued to ask county governments to pay attention to last mile connection so that they put some of their county budget resources in last mile connectivity so that they can avail our e-services to their people. But in terms of policy, I think our interface and work with them has been fairly successful, I think, and we will step up this effort. We would like to urge all those who are involved in this to work together with us. The second last point is that government would like to implement the ICT Master Plan or the Smart Kenya Master Plan. All the activities that we have committed ourselves to and all the major projects that we have committed ourselves to, I want to ask you as partners and critical partners in this sector to work with us. The first partnership is to assist members of our society, especially the political class, to understand that there are some things that are necessary that we need to do in our society to operate as a modern environment. People should not read politics in everything. We are deploying technology to enhance our security. We are deploying technology to enhance our planning, our management, the way we live, the way we provide services to our people. We are not deploying technology for politics. So that we should have conversations devoid of emotive considerations that in most cases are absolutely irrelevant to the needs of the country and to the needs of our environment. I would like to urge you, because you understand this sector very well, you have been in this sector longer than I have been, it's our responsibility as a people who are interested in the growth of our economy and the growth of our country to ensure that as we implement some of the projects that we have agreed to do so, we move them away, further and further away from politics. But otherwise, we remain committed to the implementation of all the projects that we've started there. Some, like the Konza City, are progressing well. We have overcome the earlier challenges that we had, and we think now we are going to accelerate the development of Konza City because we're done with the fiscal planning aspect, we are done with the strategic environmental assessment, we are now working on the cadastral survey, which will be complete on 10th of May, and after that, we are signing up the MDP2, and I think we are on course to realize the implementation of that project. We also hope that you will continue to work with us as government as we move forward to enhance the sector, enhance the deployment of ICTs. We are committed as government, and as I say this, firmly in the belief that I am speaking accurately for my president and my deputy president. Our commitment to the deployment of ICTs to enhance our lives, it cannot be in doubt, because you will see it in the way we have done budget allocations, you will see it in the way we have managed the governance of the ICT sector. We are consolidating, and just so you know, the president just issued a directive the other day that we consolidate all the ICT budgets and have them in the Ministry of ICT for ease of coordination and for standardization, which makes it much easier for the executive branch of government to coordinate the sector. I want once again to thank all of you, my colleagues, SAP, and all the sponsors of this event, because it's your resources, it is your support that has enabled us to get here. I cannot name all of you, but I am happy that we continue to enjoy a solid and very strong relationship. Going forward, we will enhance and step up our engagement with you so that our sector becomes one where conversations, structured conversations, lead to correct policy actions and effective policy implementation, so that then we can realize the investments that we have in this sector. I will speak now briefly on what we are doing together, and my brother will carry on from there. We have been focusing broadly, because the critical issues to focus on as you look at the region, infrastructure, policy, and of course the legal framework as we go forward. The intention, of course, being, enhancing the use of ICTs, whether we are looking at the increasing internet penetration in the region and so on. There are challenges, because we need to be candid and say that we are coming together as 4 countries under the Northern Corridor Infrastructural Coordination Framework. I know that most of the decisions that we are taking would probably be enhanced if we pulled a few more into this. Like in our sector, we will need to have a conversation with Tanzania as we go along. We are talking. We have reached out to the leadership in Tanzania. I have been in communication with my colleague, the minister in Tanzania, and I am confident that going into the future, we are going to be together as we move forward. The concern has been, enhancement of infrastructure in the region, and secondly, as I said, the question of policy. The most critical issue that was concerning everyone was that of the roaming charges, and we've been dealing with this because obviously calls to the region have been very expensive. We've identified what the challenges are. One of the challenges, I have to say plainly, is that we have different tax regimes because, there's a different tax regime in Uganda, there's a different tax regime in Rwanda, and so on and so forth. And tax regimes affect the cost of calls. And the structure of the tax regimes also affects the cost of calls. And then secondly, in certain cases, there are certain institutional issues. We are working, I need to report here that we are working with our colleagues from South Sudan to try and support the government of South Sudan to come up with a regulator because they don't have one as yet. And I'm aware that they're trying to institutionalize that function of government. They have written to us. I probably will be soon reaching out to one or two of you from the private sector, those of you I know who work in this area, to team up with one or two people from government so that we second you as a team to work with the government of South Sudan to set up a regulator. These are institutional challenges, which then make it difficult for you to wake up one morning and adopt a one-size-fits-all approach in a case like roaming charges. But we have made a lot of progress because we have identified the options that we have and now we will bring down the cost of calling in the region. We think that the information we have is sufficient, and I think in not distant future, the next meeting is going to be on 2nd of May, that's what I've been told. I think at that end of the meeting, meeting, we may announce, the new policy on roaming charges, within the region. But the intention being to bring them down. Then there's the cost of internet, which is an issue. Then there's connectivity, sharing infrastructure in the region. We are looking into all this, and we are hoping that going into the future, we will succeed to convince our colleagues to work in such a way that we facilitate one another. I must say this before I invite my colleague, that, our issues in terms of coming together, we've had various institutional challenges which we are now willing to address, and we will benefit from you. When we agree on the proposals we are going to make, we will bring them to you so that you can comment on them and advise us further on what we need to do to enhance this sector in the entire region. We are not a closed shop. Our technical team that has been in these discussions, led by our peers and Mr. Wangusi and Victor, has been very helpful and interactive with colleagues from the other countries. We hope that we'll get more suggestions when we finally present the report to you. I want at this stage, with your very kind indulgence, to invite my brother and my colleague, Minister Nsengimana from Rwanda, to make some brief remarks before we have an interactive session with you where we will take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I will try and keep my remarks very brief because my colleague has mentioned every important aspect of what I wanted to mention this morning. So if you allow, I will summarize my remarks in 3 C's. I know that industry likes frameworks. So I will congratulate and commend and challenge. Those are the 3 things I want to do this morning. Cabinet Secretary, Your Excellency Fred Matiang'I, distinguished participants. I'd like to congratulate all of you, especially my colleague, on this 6th edition of the Connected Kenya Summit. I've been part of many events where it is the first ever, and it sounds very good. But when there is no second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth, there is a sense of lack of consistency, and you know that it happens so much in our part of the world. So establishing this brand, this culture of meeting and deliberating issues of concern to the growth of the economy and the well-being of people consistently and improve every year, as my colleague has been urging you to bring improvements in the structure of the event. I think I owe you this congratulation, and if you can join me and join hands to congratulate yourselves. The second thing I'd like to congratulate you on is the Smart Kenya Master Plan. We have quite a bit of track record, both Kenya and Rwanda, in terms of planning ahead where we want to be in a few years to come as far as ICT for development is concerned. So I'm congratulating you to have, for having this plan, but most importantly, Cabinet Secretary, on branding it the Smart Kenya Master Plan, embracing the Smart Africa agenda, which our heads of states have shown us, on which they have given us the guidance. Allow me to say that since Transform Africa Summit in Kigali, October last year, made this big commitment, Kenya becomes the first country to officially launch the Smart Country Master Plan. I hope that Rwanda will be the second. We are almost through planning our Smart Rwanda Master Plan, which is going to be the 4th iteration of our 5-year ICT policies and plans that we will also rename Smart Rwanda Master Plan. And I hope to be able to invite you sometimes in October to come to Kigali as we also launch our Smart Rwanda Master Plan. Finally, on the congratulations chapter, I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. Minister, on this effective dialogue with the private sector. This is something that we all know that it contributes to building the industry. Among the many things that Rwanda tries to learn from Kenya is how this government works with the private sector and how you've been able to really put the private sector as the growth engine for the economy, and especially in the ICT sector. Back in Rwanda, we've got a situation where the government has really been playing a leading role in terms of investment, but also in terms of putting in place policies. It has taken us really where we are today, and I must say that we have moved quite fast, but it's a feeling that we have that it is really time and the environment is ripe to put the private sector ahead, something that I think Kenya has lived by for the last few years. So as you question the role that the government should play, I think we've got quite a few answers because government has been very, very active in this space. But as we also question and see how the private sector should play a greater role back home, I think we've got quite a few lessons to learn here, and I commend you for that. And I open the chapter of commending, and I realized that the things for which I need to commend you are the same that I congratulated you on. But let me commend you on the new idea that you just proposed to the audience to move from a connected Kenya to a connected East Africa, and probably to a connected Africa in line with the Smart Africa agenda. So it demonstrates leadership, and as you said, His Excellency President Uhuru has accepted to lead the policy pillar on the Smart Africa agenda. Just to give you an overview of that whole framework of Smart Africa, it has 5 key pillars. So the first pillar is policy, and this is what Kenya is leading. The second pillar is e-government. In view of making African governments more accountable, more transparent, more effective to our citizen, we want to use more of smart ICT implementations. And this is the pillar that our President, His Excellency Paul Kagame, is leading. The third pillar is on broadband. We recognize that the job of connecting Africans to broadband is yet to be completed. The last reports show that only 16% of Africans have access to broadband. And from the Connect Africa Summit that Rwanda had the privilege to host back in 2007, we realized that although 50 billion have been invested in connecting Africa, we are not yet there. So we need to keep that very high on our agenda. The fourth one is to do with sustainable development, making sure that as we grow the IT industry, we include women, we include youth, we care for the environment, we look at things like pollution and e-waste, and we grow IT to meet the challenge of today, but also think about the future. So that's the fourth pillar, and the fifth one is precisely to put the private sector first, to put up environments and regulatory frameworks that allow and facilitate investments in the sector for the growth of the economy. So those are the 5 pillars, and I'm happy to see that Rwanda and Kenya are leading on the pillars of e-government and pillars of policy. We came up also with a few flagships, which show where we want money to go in the next few years to build a smarter continent. We want to put money in a fund to be able to educate our next generation. So there will be a Smart Africa Scholarship Fund. We want to educate our people. The digital literacy for all is a very important pillar. We not only need to look at the centers of excellence on the top of the pyramid, but also educating every citizen at the bottom of it to make sure that our progress is inclusive. We are talking about smart cities and smart rural communities. This is really an important priority of the Smart Africa agenda. We are talking about job creation and youth innovation. The very things that we witnessed this morning, these are very, very important. And we are also talking about green ITs, green ICT. So there are about 9 priorities. And on this one, again, I'd like to congratulate and commend Kenya for leading on the smart economies. Smart economies include things like payments, payment solutions, content development, data centers, cloud. This priority is an important one, and it's a flagship that we were very privileged to have His Excellency the President Uhuru Kenyatta accepting to be the champion. So as an industry, wondering where you should put your investment, direct money for not only the biggest returns but also for the transformation of lives in Africa, those are some of the areas. But we are very open to discussion and include everything. And of course, if you read the document, it has much more details. Now, in closing, let me come to the challenge part. I think the first challenge to all of us, Mr. Cabinet Secretary, is to make this northern corridor of East African community the most connected and the smartest region of Africa. And I think this is a challenge which is within our reach. We've seen how this region is the cradle of the many innovations that are turning around the IT sector in Africa and beyond. And I think we have the potential, we have the appetite, we have the passion within ourselves to be able to be that beacon for our continent. And as we do so, I challenge us, I want to challenge ourselves and challenge you to be the sector that contributes the biggest growth to our national GDPs. We know the formula. Yesterday we were talking about how we can make our policy evidence-driven and research-based. We know that for every 10% increase in broadband penetration, we can deliver about 1.3% of GDP growth. That we know. So I don't know any other sector that can stand there and say that they will deliver that kind of growth to their economies. But it's a challenge that has many dimensions, that needs the contribution of everyone, and I think it's something that we can do together. And as we try to do that, I want to also challenge you to not only to compete fearlessly in trying to grab the biggest share of the cake that this economy has to offer, but also to cooperate even more closely. We know that by cooperating, we grow the cake, and by competing, everyone tries to get the biggest share. So let's cooperate among ourselves, among the private sector and the government and the civil society and communities to really grow the sector, and then let's go for competition, which is a very important aspect as well. The last challenge I want to give you this morning is to challenge you to really go out of your comfort zone. There are many companies, and this is something that I have seen home, who are very good at making money and profits and doing business in urban areas. I'm not very familiar with the situation here in Kenya, but I'm familiar with the situation in Africa in general. I want to challenge the industry to go out of your comfort zone and address the needs at the very bottom of the pyramid. The rest of the world is actually looking at you right now to learn how to do that, because we know that there are still 5 billion to be connected to internet. So the market at the bottom of the pyramid is the future. And I want to challenge you to really go out of the comfort zone. And some of you have started doing it remarkably. So it's a challenge that I believe we owe to our people, and in the challenge that translates not only in future growth of our companies, but also in the transformation of lives at the bottom of the pyramid. Finally, Cabinet Secretary, I want to thank you so much for inviting us, for the hospitality and the complicity, by the way, because every time I, bring up an idea, or you bring up an idea, it's like our minds are already very focused in the same direction, and things flow very nicely. And I don't take that for granted, Mr. Minister. So thank you very much, everyone, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, CS and the Minister from Rwanda. I think so that we take full advantage of their presence, I'll open the floor for some questions or comments, especially on the Northern Corridor ICT integration approach.
Honorable ministers and distinguished guests, all protocols observed. My name is Delano Longwe from Hitachi Data Systems. The question I have to pose for the ministers is very straightforward, very simple. What are the plans surrounding the common repository for data for the East African governments? That is to say, How do we bring together relevant, useful, real-time information to the citizens of the East African community that are going to enhance commerce and act as a catalyst to an economic revival? We see a lot of foreign investment wanting to come, but it's very hard to find relevant, real-time information, the kind that you would be able to wake up and look at online, and that's accessible in order for people to start making the correct types of decisions. So are there plans in that direction? And if there are plans, when can we expect to see that happen?
My name is Gerard Kamuntu from HP, and my question revolves around some of the international players playing in this market. A lot of times we're faced with various issues in terms of legislature and incentives for some of the investments we'd like to put in the region. I'd like to find out a little bit more of what our cabinet ministers will be assisting us on. Thanks.
I'll just make a comment concerning the North Corridor project. I mean the development of ICT in the northern region of Africa. I think my comment is for broadband penetration. I observe that the strategy, if it can include the use of existing utility networks in the region, it can actually enhance penetration of this ICT resource faster. For example, if you use the technology of interconnecting the power networks, infusing it with fiber network, which is being adopted already in the developed world. At the high level, you use the OPGW technology, then the ADSS technology to the homes, such that we have every new power line to come up with the fiber technology as a standard, be it at the high level of voltage, that is the grid level, and the low voltage lines. We can easily have most of this area connected with the necessary infrastructure that will outlast most of the current bandwidth requirements. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question on the plans on a common repository of data, which is very much on the radar screen for the Smart Africa initiative. I want us to reflect for a moment. The path towards common data repositories starts, first of all, with the path towards harmonization of policy and planning, especially when you look at the various sectors of the economy. Because, quite frankly, you know, sometimes you need to build a consensus and share certain aspects of your planning and your perspectives on investment, because data then becomes a factor in those decisions, and then you start working on a common repository. And work on that has already started. The single tourist visa, for example. The last two Northern Corridor Infrastructure Summits have focused on how we harmonize, not just investments, but how would we address the issue of standardization and investment in the education sector. That is why you recall that when we were in Entebbe, for instance, the proposal from the ministers of education that we begin a process of standardizing fees in the tertiary education sectors across the region was mooted and accepted. So as we move forward, where we are headed to is exactly that, creating a common repository of data to enable us to plan, to enable us to move around in an effective manner. In certain sectors, actually, much of this has already happened. It's just that we need to look at, from a policy framework, in my view, we need to attend the question of the information infrastructure we want to have in the East African region. Develop the policy and whatever legislative actions that will be required to manage that information infrastructure. Because take the case, for example, in the transport sector along the Northern Corridor. We are now tabulating, for example, how many days it's taking for cargo to move from the port of Mombasa to Malaba and then to DRC. And then we have also discovered that actually if we manage this more effectively, we stand to do move a lot of cargo, especially to DRC Congo, through this particular corridor. These decisions will have to be informed by credible, accurate, and easily accessible data as we move forward in this manner. So I agree with you. What we actually need is, to create a regional repositories of data. But we will need to develop a policy and framework to govern that as we move to the next level. I am personally gratified, first, that we made the first step where, we've now accepted ICT as part of the critical infrastructure. We've convinced our colleagues. For example, when we had the discussion in the last tripartite meeting, oh no, it's no longer tripartite, the last regional meeting, we talked about integrating ICTs in the critical infrastructure. So, for instance, the crude oil pipeline that's going to be done from Nakadol to Lamu is going to have a fiber optic cable built alongside that. We have worked with our colleagues in transport and infrastructure development on integrating that in the SGR, because as you build it across to Kigali, it's critical that we integrate fiber along that. And even the sharing of power, the generation and sharing of power within the region to be sure that we integrate this. So usually the first challenge is conviction, getting governments across the board for everyone to understand that this is the way you need to go. And I think that we have overcome. The next is policy and legislation, which I think is where we are headed to. Once we harmonize policy, especially in the sectors we are discussing right now, the next thing will be to now ensure that the governments that are participating in these discussions accept and begin to create frameworks that support data sharing as we go forward. The question of international players and incentives in the region. Last night, I attended the launch of the study that Tony and the team and others have been doing on the effect of VAT on the ICT sector. I think first and foremost, before we talk about incentives, I am personally concerned, and I think some of this is being addressed already, that when whatever decisions we are going to take in this sector should be informed by research, by credible data. And therefore, studies such as Tony and team and the others are doing are critical in doing this. What we now need to do then is to also study further and answer this question. What is it that we need to do to enhance investments in this sector? We can come up with a package of incentives, but it's better that that is also a product of some sort of studies. Of course, I have to be very sincere. One of the challenges that we have, as I said, is we have different tax regimes in the region, so that the tax structure we have in Kenya is slightly different from what is available in Uganda and in Rwanda and South Sudan and all that. That in itself is a big factor to investment here. And that follows also the question of legislation. We are at different times, at different stages of institutional development. The regulator in South Sudan is being born now. The regulator in Kenya is very, very strong. We are working, and interfacing with other frameworks, like now IACO, which is critical and has been looking at several studies. The critical one that we are going to benefit from is the cost of calling. How much does it cost to initiate a call and make a call in the region? And therefore, can we A, cap the calls or the roaming charges, or B, can we make East Africa one network area? My suggestion is that, yes, we are discussing these things. We are looking at what incentives we can introduce, the packages that we can introduce. In the case of Kenya particularly, the cases that affect us like now, waiving way leave fees and stuff like that, to strengthen our investment. But we will have to share this information also in the region. And we are beginning to have that cross-border conversation to answer the question, how can we support investment in this region? And now that I have this opportunity, I need to announce this, because it's an issue that has come up to our ministry several times. Some of your companies have been having challenges with the new immigration law. I mean, the new immigration policy about you bring experts who are not Kenyans, they need work permits, they need long-term visas, and they have challenges. We've had to deal with these issues recently in the ministry. We have decided, and I think this is probably the best way to deal with this, we have had a conversation with our colleagues in Interior, and we have decided that permits and visas for experts in the ICT sector will be treated a little bit differently. And this is how we have suggested. We've asked the ICT authority to work with those who will be applying for visas and for permits from this sector and process them, and so that the ICT authority participates in working with the Ministry of Interior, so that you don't have any, any hitches. So as we go forward, those of your institutions that are locating in Nairobi and are feeling sometimes a bit frustrated that, either permits are taking long and so on, we have created a desk at the ICT authority with which you can work so that your process of sorting out your permit and so on is faster and it's easier, because you have the ICT authority working side by side with you in talking to Interior. So no one should have any challenges going into the future about 10 of your experts not being able to access permit. The question on broadband and integration with utility infrastructure, I think, Eric, you are just speaking to the choir. We've been basically singing and preaching that all along. That is how, because I think we long lost the days when it was fashionable to build a road, start cutting it tomorrow to move fiber around. We have all these kinds of challenges that we've had. I have been moving around in the country, begging governors and telling them the wisdom of not charging Jamii Telecom wailing fees when they are putting fiber across, or Liquid Telecom when they're putting fiber across your county. But the benefits that accrue far outweigh the little money that you're going to make from whaling fees and so on. That is the way to go, to support infrastructure and to integrate it with, other utility infrastructure. That's why we have been talking with Kenya Power and Lighting and Ketraco, and that's why in the cabinet, the infrastructure, energy, and ICT are grouped together, because we are now operating on a shared infrastructure framework, so that our discussions on how we are going to advance infrastructure, it just simply doesn't make sense to anybody to do a road, very nice road like Thika Highway, and there are no ducts. And then the following day, we are cutting it. So we did that when we did not know. Now we know. So I think we are going in the way in which you are proposing. My brother, if you could add any comments I may have forgotten.
And in the interest of your patience and time, the intention originally was to have this as both policy and more tactical strategic discussion. So we'll allow just 2 quick presentations from the private sector in response to the next layer after the fantastic dialogue with the CSs. So I'd like to just quickly bring to the stage Mr. Byron Clutterbuck, the CCEO of CCOM, to walk us through a very quick presentation on the thinking that will support some of the policy issues at the East African level. Welcome.
I'm Byron Clatterbuck. I'm also a chief of a very small tribe known as CCOM. We're a small new company. We saw IBM putting up there, founded in 1911. CCOM was actually founded in 2007. So we're even younger than Facebook, if you can believe that. I won't go through all this data because it's quite a bit of data, and if you'd like this presentation, we can certainly arrange to have it put somewhere where you can get access to it. But I think we'd all agree that sitting here today at Connected Kenya 2014, the experience of access to the internet and access to data is much different than it was when the first Access Kenya happened 6 years ago. I think now I'm looking around the audience, I'm seeing people on their Facebook, tweeting, watching YouTube videos. I feel like I'm at home in my living room with my daughters. But it's good to see that that is actually something that is now capable of happening, that certainly wasn't able to happen 6 years ago. As you can see from the graphs, since 2008, the amount of internet data that is available in Africa has just skyrocketed, and that's continuing to grow. The fact that the throughput speeds, if you look at the other bar graph, for many markets has increased as well. And the usage of internet, the percentage of users, I think the Honorable Minister mentioned that 16% overall for Africa, but if you look at today, and actually this data is a little old for Kenya, is already over 30%. So you're seeing that development of internet access and access to data that then is enabling a lot of the value-added services and all of the things that we've kind of been talking about over the past couple of days. You know, that's a basic underlying fundamental requirement that's needed for those services to be run. However, if you look at some of this again, compared to some other markets that are also developing very fast, there's still quite a challenge. The throughput, the access speeds, and actually the bottom graph there is kind of a quality of service metric. And the baseline for that is, you know, if you're in most places in Africa or any of those countries listed, could you actually conduct a Skype call with decent quality? Okay, because I think all of us are aware we use all of these applications and we want to be able to use them on our iPhones or our Samsungs or our laptops or our iPads, and it's difficult for that to happen. So there's still a challenge in how ubiquitous and how able we are able to connect to others. If you look further, you can see that part of the issue is that a lot of the applications and a lot of the content that are largely private or public cloud driven, right? And I've just listed a few here: Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, and Yahoo. Now, there's also a lot of other factors, whether you have adequate data center space for these companies to put their servers and to put their content where they need to. But by and large, it's really about access to data speed and data transmission capabilities. So I think we heard there was the 4 V's. I got the 3 C's. There was the 4 V's, and I think velocity and volume, which I think was mentioned by the gentleman from IBM, are quite critical in this. So you can see that things are coming, and you can see there that South Africa and Kenya, Facebook is hosted by Akamai, who's actually on our network already. Google has been on the continent for a while. But I think that what we'd also see is that the experience when you access content through those providers has improved dramatically since they've brought that on. Now, Akamai has just come onto the continent, so I think that over time you're going to see that Facebook latency and the ability to get information on Facebook and post things on Facebook will improve as well. The next slide is, as we know, Africa is largely mobile internet driven. In other words, people use their handsets or mobile devices to access the internet. There's a lot of numbers on this slide. I think the key points, if you look at the monthly consumption of data, which is kind of over there on the left, Africa, 21 megabytes a month. That's the average, of course. If you look at the far right, and I actually happen to live in Hong Kong, and in Asia Pacific it's already 1,100, which is over a gig per month. That's an average. So you can kind of see where things, you know, if you look at where high concentrations of populations and the ability to do things even on your mobile device. And you know, you kind of look at what things are happening here. A lot of it's the social networking, it's the viewing of real-time entertainment that is something that I think is quite far away if you look at where Africa is today. But we can see that this is a McKinsey projection, that by 2025, there's going to be a radical change. And I think we're all aware of that. We've all been talking about it. We've all been seeing what's happening at a local level and in an East African community level. But I think that there's an aspect that CECOM's involved in that I'll explain a little more, that's really about connecting Africa and the people in Africa to the rest of the world. And you can see today we're saying 16% internet penetration in Africa, projected to grow over 50% by 2025. So, how does that kind of happen? A lot of you are on your 3G looking at the Connected Kenya website or looking at the ICT roadmap document I saw on people's computers. So people are able to access that content and see that content. And you'd want to be able to have people in Europe or the United States to see that content. And you'd want to be here sitting in Mombasa or in Nairobi and be able to access content that is stored also in Europe and the United States. And I'm really going to talk about the CCOM network here a little bit, but I think it's actually pertinent and relevant to just the overall ICT development in Eastern Africa. Before 2009, there were no high-speed cables landing in Kenya. In 2009, we had 3 cables land. So Kenya, in one respect, is well connected to the international community via international subsea cables. Those are basically fiber optic cables that run under the ocean and connect to different points. However, there is a concern about a few things, and I'll talk about it from a quality perspective. And by that, I really mean the reliability of the data transmission network, the speed of the data transmission network, and the cost. Because I think we all realize that if the bandwidth is expensive, it just does not get consumed. So part of our philosophy is that we want to enable a more reliable service, a faster service, and a lower cost service. And one of the key ways to kind of achieve those results is, as you can see from our map here, this is a diagram, just high-level diagram of our IP network and the key routes on our network. And I don't know if many of you are aware of this world. This is the world that CCOM lives in, which is very much about international connection paths, okay, data transmission. Just about 30 kilometers north of here, there's a landing station where the CCOM cable lands in Mombasa. And from there, we connect into Nairobi, and we are attempting to build more network into Kampala as well. We'd like to build down in Tanzania and also connect to our landing station in Dar in Tanzania. Previously, almost all the capacity leaving Kenya went north and went across Egypt and across the Mediterranean into Europe. Now, we all know there's been issues in Egypt, there's been issues in the Red Sea, and the data transmission paths have been disrupted. So relatively recently, about a year ago, we lit the fiber that we have that lands into Mumbai, which actually gives us a diverse path that lands into India. And from there, we connect into data networks in India as well. Now, what does that do? It gives you access to Asian content, for one thing, but it also gives you the added resiliency in the network that says if anything happened across Egypt, our network could shift over into India, and we'd still have connectivity up, so that IP customers or people looking for content would still be able to find it, because out of India, there's multiple links to other countries and other sources of that data. But the most important development is more recently, and it was enabled actually by terrestrial connectivity across South Africa. And actually what that enables us to do is, if in the event that anything happens to a cable or a fiber link heading north, that our network can actually go south. So we can actually go around Africa. Now, we couldn't do that before because we couldn't get across South Africa. Now we have that capability with our investment in the WAX cable, or the Western Africa cable. We can now connect to Europe on an alternative path. So really what this says is that in terms of the international connectivity options out of Kenya, we have now a much more reliable, dependable network. We also have more content that is brought onto the continent because we're hosting the Akamai cache, the CDN networks are coming, we've got level 3 on our network, Google, Akamai, who hosts Facebook. All of this content, more and more of it is coming onto the continent, which means that your experience is much faster, much better. And finally, of course, as we augment the capacity in the network, and particularly it was good to hear some of the comments made about developing national and local access infrastructure, then the overall cost of the network capabilities goes down. And I think that, of course, as we know, drives up consumption and drives up the ability for an ICT industry to develop and grow. So on that note, I am going to say goodbye, and thank you very much.
Our final presentation for this session, the East Africa Minister session on integrated infrastructure, will be Mr. Ben. I hope we didn't lose him at some point. Ben Roberts is the CEO of Liquid Telecom, who, interestingly, are new in the market, but he'll tell us a bit more of the strategy for the region. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you, ministers and distinguished guests. I really want to talk about building integrated ICT infrastructure also. So our vision is building Africa's digital future and Kenya's digital future as well. We've seen quite a lot of houses in the presentations so far this week, but here's our house on the right. So one of the foundations of the Kenya's ICT Master Plan is in building integrated ICT infrastructure. So we've broken that down into our own house, which has got foundations and pillars and a roof as well. So I'll first go through the foundations. Before I do that, I'll just talk about ICT infrastructure. It's all very well building these pipes if nobody puts anything through them. So you see there a big fat empty pipe and a small one there with a trickle going through. And it's fairly typical that we've put all this capacity in and it's very underutilised. So whilst we have to the beach from Byron's cable to from Seacom, we have masses and masses of subsea capacity. The consumers and the enterprises and businesses are not really using it. So the key things for me in really building the infrastructure is not just in building infrastructure, it's actually filling it up and making services for people to use. So some of the principles we have, we're building it to last, we're building it to first world standards, and we build it to grow with the needs of the customer and the consumer. A key thing is network operations. Some of the sad things of African infrastructure is that we've seen it decline into disrepair. So having network operations and field operations to maintain and keep your networks running is absolutely key to preserve your investment after you've made it. You also need a sustainable business model. So it's all very well raising lots of money and then building something that no one comes and uses. You have to have a model to actually fill it up. To do that, we believe you need a diverse range of services, not just selling capacity. So that generates various degrees of revenue, which will get you a return on your investment, enable you to carry on building, which is what we're doing. So for that, you need an appropriate financing model, skills development and transfer that are absolutely key, and services to fill up the pipe. So back to the house, the foundations of infrastructure. We believe that the key infrastructure needs for ICT development are in backbone fibre. So backbone fibre connecting up from the beach landing stations to the cities. That has to be built to certain standards. There's some things here, but I would summarise the standards: either bury it deep or put it up high, so that it can't be damaged. You know, we run fast networks through it, putting in growth for the future, so that as this explosion of data is coming, we know that the network technology is there to last for 5 or 7 years. High speeds, and then ring protection. So a lot of problems have been had with fibre cuts, but the only way to deal with that is to have ring protections and loops. That means when one fibre gets cut, you don't have any issues. But that also needs backup with network operations centres and field engineers who will go out and fix the things sometimes in the rain, sometimes at night when the things break down. And in the cities as well, it's just as important to have rings because a lot of construction going on in all cities and fibres still do get cut. The main thing really for ICT development is in last mile rollout, which is where the most money needs to be spent, the most investment needs to be made. So doing fibre to the house, fibre to the building, it's quite expensive. No matter which way you do it. Obviously doing things on power lines, as we've heard, speeds things up and is much cheaper. But we're looking at fibre to the building for corporate enterprise and wholesale customers. Fibre to the home, fibre to the building, fibre to the cabinet for consumers, so it's giving fast broadband for consumers. So we're doing a lot of this in places like Zimbabwe, but also here in Kenya, we're doing a couple of pilot projects to build fibre right to the house of someone's home, so they get the very fastest internet. The main bunch of users are going to use wireless technology to access the internet for now. So here, WiMAX is quite prevalent, LTE is coming along, and 3G is also around. And that's the main, the bulk of consumers, particularly in Kenya, are using wireless technologies to get their internet. With that as well, integrated entertainment, IPTV, direct to home, direct to television, that's a consumer service which is going to drive their usage of the internet. Not forgetting satellite, because in order to access everybody, some people are not going to be near a fibre or a microwave for a very long time. And we do see satellite and VSAT usage growing, and we see that as an increasing demand as people have more digital services in the cities. Those in the rural areas, they have a need for the services. And some people can afford VSAT. It isn't so expensive as it used to be. So we see that quite a big growth across all of Africa, in fact. And then there's some new technologies around, from our friends at Facebook and whatever, balloons, drones, next generation satellites. We'll watch this space and see what happens. But I think technology will come to bring access to all of Africa at some stage. Data center is absolutely key. We had a lot of talk on this about big data. Big data needs big places to put it, and those places need to be big, safe places, especially with events we've had last year, where we're away from other people entering the building. It's a purpose-built center just for storing data and nothing else, which obviously has robust power, cooling, and fire prevention, and security of tenure as well. So you need to own the land that the data center is built on. As well, I think it's very important to have a critical mass of infrastructure. Just having a small fibre network really isn't enough. So by having a large network which is spanning East Africa, Southern Africa, you can address not just your local services in Kenya, but the regional services that are needed, we're hearing about now. It's not just the governments are looking at regional services, but enterprise as well, particularly the banking sector. Every Kenyan bank has got a branch in Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. So it's very important. Technology is absolutely key. 15 years ago, we were building networks and putting in ATM technology. Now it's all IP, but you have to be adaptive. You're building the infrastructure, you're building the hard fibre in the ground to carry the technology, fibre being fairly future-proof, but you've got to pick the right technology, not the one that your vendor tells you to pick, the one that's going to serve your customers and your needs as much as possible now. So, a mix of technologies are coming along, and particularly in the access technology, you're seeing developments that are speeding things up. Network operations, service operations is absolutely key. Having local teams in country that are fixing your services, not just running it from an outsourced call center in India or something like that. You've got to have people on the ground that are actually repairing and keeping your infrastructure in good shape and keeping your customers informed when things are going wrong. So these are all absolutely essential for ICT infrastructure, because infrastructure on its own is really meaningless without services and operations. So I'll go on to the services, which are the pillars of network. By having a range of the services, we're saying that this is the best way to fill up your pipes, get the return on investment on your pipes. So on the wholesale sector, operators and carriers need capacity on your networks. So by making networks open access, not closed networks, that is the best way to fill up the bulk of your pipes. It may not make all the money on your pipes, but it will fill up the bulk, use the capacity and offload excess capacity you have. So as well as operators, in Kenya particularly, it's a more mature market. There are a lot of independent small ISPs and resellers. Even people in the retail sector are selling broadband to consumers. And I think that's going to increase. In United Kingdom, we have Tesco selling broadband, and you'll see the same trend here. You'll see Nakimat selling broadband and things like that. This is perhaps where you concentrate the most. It's perhaps the hardest to run reliable, secure services because the demands of the customer are higher. But in many ways, this is where you can make more money on your network. So it's going to subsidize the low-end users by making a better revenue return on your capital. But enterprise and government, they want absolutely robust communications. They want the lowest latency possible. And absolutely 100% reliability, SLAs if it goes wrong. And then people to talk to if it does go wrong, that they can have managed services from that help them with their issues. But the potential growth in this is huge. Nairobi has got very large buildings, which are only taking 10 megabits per second or something like that. And I think underinvestment by enterprise in the services they're using. They're just using a bit of internet and a bit of email. That's why they don't need much bandwidth. But as they start using the data centers, big data, having large shared systems, then their needs are going to go up. So managed services are what's required, and then with those managed services, as they become more reliable, then users will start using cloud services more. At the moment, cloud services are not being taken up because the connections are not reliable enough. But as the connections are, you can say it's always going to be there, then you can always rely on it. I worked for a company some years ago, 15 years ago, where we had everything in the cloud in the office, and the network would break down all the time, and we'd just sit and have a cup of tea. But business can't be like that now. You have to have, if you're going to use cloud services, you've got to make sure your network is always never going to go down. So, I mean, Kenya is one of the leading nations in the internet economy, I think. There's a lot going on. And then when it comes to broadband services for citizens, I say here affordable, fast enough services. Obviously, the cost comes, the higher the speed, the higher the cost is fairly normal. But internet entertainment, education, social media, communications, so they're driving the use. So they're driving the use for high bandwidth, particularly video. But services like e-government and mobile internet banking, they're the ones driving the need. So as Kenya transforms and has these services available, then more people are going to need more broadband. So this is why I'm saying so much more access network has to be built. And this is what we're really concentrating on over the next 5 years. So yeah, people will only spend what they can afford from their disposable income. So I think we heard earlier it was 2.5% in Kenya, but it doesn't matter how fast the connection is, how many megabits per second they get, they're only going to actually spend what they can afford. Last bit is on implementation. To implement development, obviously you need financing, you need planning and strategy, the best teams you can have available. You need to use the best partners, contractors and vendors, and manage those contractors, vendors and partners correctly as well. So I've seen a few failed fiber projects where vendors have put things in and not been supervised, but it's absolutely key. And innovation is also key, picking the best technology to get the most out of your network, finding ways to break barriers by putting the longest fiber spans you can if you have a wide area with no breaks, things like that. So it's very key. And network build out and project management. So rolling out your network, if you're doing a lot of build at the same time, you need to manage it yourself as well as just getting your vendors to work on it. And from that as well, standards and quality control, that's how you keep your contractors in check. So I think that's it, and thank you very much.